It was over. The surrender of Robert E. Lee at Appomattox signaled the end of the Civil War.
It was a long, very bloody war. Both sides were exhausted. There was rejoicing, especially in the North, about the end of the fighting.
The celebration would be short-lived. 5 days later, John Wilkes Booth would enter Ford's Theater in Washington and shoot Abraham Lincoln. The next day, Lincoln was dead.
The public was ready to celebrate, at least in the North, and then had essentially no chance to do that. Went right into this kind of moment of national mourning. And in many ways, it was like Lincoln was almost the last victim of this horrific war.
There were services for the fallen president in Washington, but then came a remarkable period when much of the nation, an estimated 7 million people, would take part in honoring Lincoln as his coffin was carried back to Springfield, Illinois. In the largest cities like New York and Buffalo, the train would stop, the body would be carried in procession to a local site, and thousands would file by to pay respects. But the story of the Lincoln funeral train is also a story of places in between, small towns where people lined the track to bow their heads as the train passed. Places like Syracuse, where the train would stop briefly.
Back in those days, the main train line through Syracuse ran here along Washington Street. A large depot straddling the street at Vanderbilt Square, and it was here that the crowds gathered to receive the funeral train bearing the body of Abraham Lincoln.
The population of Syracuse in 1865 was a little over 31,000. 35,000 turned out that day to view the train. It arrived late on the night of April 26th. Rain was falling. It stayed for just half an hour, and then it was gone, passing gatherings of hundreds in small towns along the way. For many, it was a very public release of emotions kept in check during that long and bloody Civil War.
They'd had many individual expressions of grief throughout the course of the war, but it's quite cathartic to be able to express it as a nation.
4 years earlier, a former congressman from Illinois made his way to Washington after winning less than 40% of the popular vote in a race for president. Now the train carrying his body was retracing the route, this time taking him home.
This was the last chance to say goodbye to this president who America suddenly realized had saved them from this awful catastrophe.